This video should be, I think, relatively short. In this one, I'm just going to show you how you can, let me clear this really quick so that we can start from scratch. Recode multiple variables into a new variable. So just another thing to throw in your recoding toolbox, really. Just only need the Rio library because in order to import our data set. We don't really need anything else. It's going to take a minute to import those because we're also going to import that full ANES data set that I posted in last week's module because one of the variables we want to work with is in our data set. So that said, so in the full survey, we had a lot of answers that were kind of vague. So we have the 1,201 answers where people said, haven't thought about that much, those 99s that we recoded into fours, moderates last time. And also that we mentioned an argument could be made to maybe make those NA. And then we had like 1,800 respondents that answered middle or moderate or middle of the road, which in surveys, it's common for people to kind of gravitate to that middle response when they don't want to commit for one reason or the other to, either being conservative or liberal, when, maybe they do actually have conservative or liberal preferences. So the ANES actually follows that question up with another question that says, if you had to choose, would you consider yourself a liberal or a conservative? And if we want to look at so here's the original variable. And this follow-up variable, these were all inapplicable because they only asked the question of people who said moderate, haven't thought about that much, or don't know. And so they asked them to if they had to choose one, and 1,320 of them chose, I think this was the liberal response here. 1,534 chose conservative, and only 20 held fast and said neither. So what we can actually do then is combine these two variables to create our new variable. So the if-else function still operates like it always does. We just have a couple more conditions added in. In the original, in the my data, when we did this, we'd kind of taken a shortcut since everything was going the correct direction and didn't spell all these out. But because we're adding these extra conditions in here, it's easier for us to actually just spell what exactly we want in each category. So in 7, which is slightly conservative, we just want to keep those that already said they were, extremely conservative. We want to keep those that said they were extremely conservative. 6 was just plain conservative. 5 was slightly conservative. So what we're going to tell it here is that if they said in the original variable that they were slightly conservative, or if they were asked this follow-up question and they said that they were conservative, we're going to call that slightly conservative. Because if they didn't want to commit to being conservative the first time around, we'll say that when we made them choose, that means they were just slightly conservative. Then the next argument we have is dealing with the moderates. So if they answered moderate in the original variable, and then they were asked this follow-up question, so this time we want an and that is just because if we say or, it's going to lump in these 20 people that said 3 could have initially said don't know or haven't thought about that much. So we don't want those people, if they still said neither after that, we kind of want to keep them in that don't know or haven't thought about that much variable, or we want to keep them as missing. We only want to consider them moderate if they said they were moderate in the first place and then said neither when asked if they could lean. So that's why we put the and here. So if they said moderate and they said neither when asked for a preference, then we're going to call them moderate. And then down here, this is the same as the conservative the slightly conservative line, these are slightly liberals. If they were slightly liberal, or when asked to choose one, if forced to choose one, they said they were liberal, then we're going to say they're slightly liberal. And then the rest of it is just, 2 is 2, 1 is 1, and anything left over then is NA. So if we run this and we run a new table for that, we can see that we've got, this category has shrunk considerably because most of those chose one or the other now. And we don't have any of the 99s, we don't have any of the negative numbers, so we've gotten everything else either distributed somewhere along the spectrum or coded as missing. And if we run this, we can see that we've got 8,107 cases that still have fallen somewhere on this spectrum, whereas out of 8,280. So we're really only losing, like 100 and some odd cases doing it this way versus the 1,200 and some that we, had before that hadn't thought about this as much. Or all of these 1,800 respondents that said that they were moderate when really they actually ultimately chose a preference from one or the other. So homework 5 is actually going to ask you to do something similar with the various variables for party ID. So we've already looked at this one, which is the party ID 3, where we had just, I can't remember now which one's which, but we had Republican, Democrat, and Independent. But there's 2 follow-up questions in the ANES after asking that question. The first one asks the people who answered the previous question identifying as either Republican or Democrat, if they're strong or not very strong of whichever party they identified with. And then, so now we've got, here again, I don't remember which is which, but let's just say, 1 is not very strong and 2 is strong. So we've got this many out of the people who said Republican or Democrat that said they're either strong, not very strong Republican or not very strong Democrat. Then we have this variable here, which asks everyone else, so all the people that wouldn't pick Republican or Democrat. So that includes people that said independent, or the people that said don't know, or other. Whether they think of themselves as closer to Republicans or Democrats. And typically we refer to the people who choose a party in this question as leaners. And then the remaining who remain firm in their selection of neither get coded as either whatever their original choice was in the original variable, or whatever their original choice was in that original variable. So what you wind up with is a 7-point scale going from strong Republican to strong Democrat. Strong Republican is going to have a value of 7. Strong Democrat, a value of 1 is what we ultimately want to see when you get to that in the homework.